You there?
Yep.
Okay. So we're gonna Tony and I are gonna look at Isaiah 52. We're gonna start in verse 13. Um, we're hoping to be able to get through a couple verses, but quality is more important than quantity here. So uh, let's start. What do you? Why don't you read? What versions do you have there, Tony?
I got LEB, NIV, UK, and ESV.
Okay. Um, okay. So you have the LEB, the NIV, UK, and the ESV.
Yep.
Okay. The is it possible for you to replace the ESV with the NASB? Just because I don't want you to have to read too many versions, and the NASB is super literal.
NASB.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can do that.
yeah. It just helps. Just it gives you they all have. I mean, NASB, ESV, and LEB are definitely more the formal equivalents. So they try to do they're more literal translations. The NIV is more dynamic. But if you have those three, the LEB, the NIV UK, and the NASB, you'll get to see different flavors.
Yeah, okay, because the ESV and NIV were pretty similar.
ESV and the NIV were similar? Huh.
Yeah.
That's very interesting that you would say that. Their translation philosophy is radically different.
Yeah. Well, at least for those couple verses, they were pretty. I mean, these three versions are all different.
Yes, which
Just
is
in the first verse, they're all different.
mm-hmm. All right, so let's work on verse 13, 52,
Okay.
verse 13, and you let me tell me the version you read and read it.
All right, I got LEB now. Look, my servant shall achieve success. He shall be exalted, and he shall be lifted up. He shall be very high. So that was the LEB for verse 13.
Yep.
NASB says, Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted.
Mm-hmm.
And then NIV UK, see, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Yeah, so the second clause seems to be pretty similar, but also out of order.
Yeah.
Or LEB, and then the first clause isn't the same in any of them.
Yeah.
He shall achieve success. He will act wisely.
Yeah.
He will prosper.
Yeah. Yeah, baby. It's Hine Yaskil Abdi. So it's behold, Yaskil Abdi. Yaskil is he will do something. It's in the third masculine, third person masculine singular. So you know it's he will do something. Yaskil. Prosper is potentially like you see that in the Psalms and in the Proverbs. I would say it's strange to translate that here because the English word prosper has the connotations of to just proliferate and wealth. Things are going well. But succeed, I think, is the best translation. And then act wisely. I mean, it can. Which one says act wisely? Is the NASB?
NIV.
Oh, NIV says act wisely. Okay. I mean, it is. I mean, indeed, it does. It can be translated that way, but it's a bit vague here. So contextually, why would you? I mean, I would say that the better way to translate this is going to be success, and you're going to see that in a skill update. There is. Let's see. What's there? I'm not gonna go there. I'm looking at Hebrew 10. So, yeah, there is this idea of him coming through. It's a different word. It says Yitzlach in verse 10, 53 verse 10, about the servant. And people have tended to read 52:13 through 53:12 as one section. They call it the servant song, which makes good sense. It is. There were no chapters. Chapters and verses were added thousands of years later. So this is kind of one contained passage, and in this contained passage, there is this idea of the servant in the servant's hand, the will or the desire or the plan of Yahweh will succeed. It gets through. it's accomplished. So I would say let's translate this word. He will succeed, which is already it's what I mean. In English, the word succeed it gives us the connotation of there's a mission, there's
Yeah,
there's an
there's
objective.
some type of plan, which I'm guessing now is like gonna be. Yeah, if I were to ask, succeed at what? This passage will probably answer that at some point, I'm guessing.
It will. It's also weird because it's a bit like fish guts. You can't take one part out. You're gonna pull one part. It's gonna yank everything with it. And
Right.
what's funny to me is this idea of the so hine yaskil avdi, my servant. So you have the prophet writing. It wouldn't make sense to me that avdi, my servant, is the prophet speaking. In other words, I don't think it's the prophet's servant.
Right.
I don't think it's Israel's servant. Israel has been identified as Yahweh's servant already in Isaiah. But what's funny is so that would mean Yahweh speaking. And what's interesting is that Yahweh says hine, behold. And the reason why it's interesting that he says behold right here is just before he will say in verse 6, he's got this concern. He says, Lachin yada'ami, therefore they will know my people, my name, therefore in this day, because I am the one doing the talking or speaking, hineni. So verse 6, he says hine, but he conjugates it in the first person. So it's Yahweh speaking, but he's conjugating it in the first person, singular, saying, behold me. So you have Yahweh in, let's see here.
The camera dipped out.
And no, it didn't, baby. I'm back on. All right. So I don't know why it's doing that, but now I have this little trick. All right. So we have yeah. So he says, "Behold me," in verse 6, and it's funny because he's talking about him returning to Jerusalem. Yahweh talks about returning to Jerusalem and people beholding him, right?
Yeah.
Super explicit. And then he says, behold my servant, right?
Right.
I'm interested in exploring what is the relationship between the servant and Yahweh. Hine, yaskil abdi, behold, my servant will succeed. Now here's what's interesting, is the servant will succeed. We don't exactly know what. I would say that the objective is rooted in the stuff he was talking about already in the prior verses. So it is linked to this a return to Jerusalem, comforting the ruins of Jerusalem, which would be like, well, how do you comfort the ruins of a place? Well, you rebuild it, right? And we're going to see that in 54, that he's going to rebuild. So there's this project. It has to do with Zion. It has to do with Jerusalem. It has to do with Yahweh locally showing up, aiding Zion. And this servant is a part of that. Now, I will say this. I'll go to 57:15. Ki cho amar. Yeah, so Isaiah 57:15 says, Ki chomar ram v'nisa shochenad v'kadosh shemo maram v'kadosh eshchon v'etako ushafal ruach. Okay, so here's Yahweh describes himself in Isaiah 57:15. He says, because thus he is saying, exalted, Ram, lifted up. Okay, the one who's high, the one who's exalted. Right, same words. Yahweh describes himself with the same words as he describes the servant, which is very interesting, because you actually have a overlap. Remember that weird verse that we were talking about before we started recording, which is just like a monster verse. It's Isaiah 53,
Right.
verse 10.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's Vayahweh Chafetz Dako. And that word of being crushed, it's here. So he says, in your LEB, it says, "For thus says the high and lofty one who resides forever, and whose name is holy. I reside in a high and holy place," right?
Yeah.
"And with the contrite and humble of spirit, to revive the spirit of the humble, and to revive the heart of the contrite." Now, here what's interesting. This is what's interesting. For what? Yeah, the word contrite there. That's the word for crushed,
Huh.
which is interesting. It's the idea of being one who it's somebody who is. I don't know why they're translating it contrite in the LEB. I mean, look, you can see the footnote there, literally crushed.
Yeah.
In other places in Isaiah, I think in 3, the way this lemma occurs in Isaiah, it's people who are oppressed unjustly, right? So he's saying, I don't, and so here's the thing. Yahweh's speaking of his own status. He describes his dwelling, and he talks about himself in cosmic celestial terms, like he dwells or tabernacles. This word shochein means tents. He tents. So he's talking about the loftiness and the kind of, you could say he's talking about his exalted dwelling and referring to the temple. But he's saying, I'm not just found there. I don't just dwell there. I also dwell with these people who are crushed, right? But that matters. That matters contextually because it helps us to see why this servant would be linked with him, right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things I don't want to fall prey to is, I want to say, how could this text in its original context have been associated with how would this text have been understood or read originally by the people who received Isaiah, as opposed to all the speculation that's come from various spiritual movements that have seized up this verse. So we've already got through 13. Do you need to jump back to the board?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, we got through 13, and I would say this. I'll close with this, that I think that because it talks about Yahweh's dwelling, because it uses the word for tent, because he talks about returning to Jerusalem, and because he describes this servant in the same terms that he describes his dwelling place, high, exalted, lifted up, it makes sense that he's going to exalt his servant to dwell with him.
Okay.
Like on Zion, in some sense. That would be a way to read this, that somehow this servant will be brought with him. Now the question is the servant some individual? Is the servant the people of Israel? Is the servant someone else? So yeah, all right. Well, I love you, bro. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Love you, dude.
Yeah, man.
Peace.
Peace.